Welcome back to the most fun you're going to have all day. We've got multiple choice questions with our sampling techniques. Diving right in, which of the following statements is ordinarily correct about the sample size in statistical sampling when testing controls? Diving right into the first possibility, as the tolerable deviation rate increases, the sample size should also increase. Thinking about this critically, as the rate at which we tolerate deviations or issues or problems, variances within our testing, the sample size should also increase. I'm going to disagree with that because this is saying as we can tolerate more issues, we should do more testing, right? Sample size increases, we do more testing. That's contradictory. As we can allow for more issues, we're actually going to do less work, less sampling, less testing. For that reason, I am eliminating letter A. Next up is letter B. The population size has little effect on the sample size. I'm going to be for real. I beat this to death, I know, in the lesson, and this is a phrase you should definitely memorize. You should have familiar, but let's say you weren't. Let's keep reading. We can do a little process of elimination here. Next, the expected population deviation rate. So how much we expect, to simplify it, how much we expect issues to arise has little effect on determining the sample size. I disagree with that based on the logic from our letter A here. The more we expect issues, the more testing we're going to have. And the less we expect issues, the less testing we're going to have. So that just doesn't really make sense there. So I'm going to eliminate that. And last here, as the population size doubles, the sample size should also double. Well, actually, this is directly contradictory to letter B. So one of these would have to be right, one of these would have to be wrong. As the population size doubles, the sample size should also double. That's not particularly true because this population size has little effect on the sample size. The point we beat to death in the lessons. The final answer, I am going to say letter B. At a reference, what we saw also in the lessons, this is pulled directly from the AICPA's authoritative literature. Right? We see here that the factor, the number of items in the population, has virtually no effect on the sample size unless the population is very small. What does have an impact on the sample size is the possible deviation. It's not the number of items in the population that has an impact on the sample size. Just to drill it in here, it is the possibility of error, possibility of variance, possibility of deviation. That is what has the impact on the sample size. Next up here, which of the following is a characteristic of non-statistical sampling? This is something we went over quite a bit, and let's take a nice stab at this question. Well, first, it requires judgment to select a sample. Okay, I kind of like that because we know statistical sampling is quantitative, and we know that non-statistical sampling is qualitative. And as it's qualitative, you're going to likely use judgment rather than calculations to determine it. And while I like letter A, let's keep reading along. It uses the laws of probability to select a sample. That sounds quite quantitative, and as such, we would use that likely for statistical sampling. Let me cross that off. Next, it requires each item to have an equal probability of being selected. Again, and also, like, if you're thinking about it, that's directly contradictory to letter A, so I don't like that either because letter A sounds pretty good. And lastly, for letter D, it is preferable for an audit level engagement. Well, if we remember from our lesson, you can use either. Neither is preferable. It depends on you as the auditor. Maybe you use a little bit of both. Mix it up. Final answer here, for all of those reasons, is going to be letter A. For reference, here is where we went through a good amount of what makes up non-statistical sampling in the lessons. Feel free to pause, refresh yourself. Now let's keep moving along. While testing a sample of an audit client's bank reconciliations during the year under audit, an auditor notices that several immaterial deposits in transit did not clear the bank in a timely manner. The auditor suspects there may be fraud. Not good at all. Which of the following audit responses is most appropriate in this situation? I don't know. You tell me. You are the intelligent candidate. Well, fortunately, I can't hear what you're going to say. So let's go through it together. First, the auditor should report the finding to the appropriate level of management immediately. That's an interesting point because communication, super important. However, we see several immaterial deposits in transit did not clear the bank in a timely manner. If there's fraud, I would say your first bet when it comes to fraud is And while, yes, communication does dictate that we should go to a level above those who commit fraud and tell them about it, 2 points here. One, we don't know that there is fraud yet. We suspect fraud, in which case we would want to investigate further independently. Secondly, we don't know if possibly those above the maybe lower level employees here, maybe they're intertwined with the fraud. But we want to kind of get a sense of what's going on a little bit more first. So I'm gonna preliminarily cross off letter A. Next, we have the auditor should focus on material misstatements and not consider these immaterial findings. I'm going to disagree with that. It's fraud, and while it's immaterial, if you suspect fraud, you should still look into it. That's something you need to look into. You need to look into that fraud. You can't just not look into it. Next, we have the auditor should consider the implications for the integrity of management or employees and the possible effect on other aspects of the audit. That sounds like a well-rounded, precise answer, but let's keep reading. Next, we have because the findings are not material, the auditor should project the errors to the population and consider the materiality. Important point when it comes to fraud, materiality is not important. Fraud needs to be investigated. Now, you're not going to possibly give the financial statements a bad opinion if there's immaterial fraud by one person, right? But the thing is with that fraud, if any fraud is known about, it needs to be communicated to the appropriate parties and dealt with because you need to see if it possibly goes higher up the ladder because fraud is indicative of larger issues with management. I here am going to go with letter C. Seems to be the best answer for us. Wrapping it up with our final item here. In a test of purchase orders, the auditor selected a random sample of 60 items, so that's your sample size, out of a population of 1,200 purchase orders. The auditor discovered $4,000 in overstatement in the sample. The company's materiality is $65,000, and the tolerable misstatement for purchases is $50,000. What should the auditor do next? Interesting point. Well, do we just pass on the exceptions? Nope, that's not what we do. That's not our process. Do we propose an adjustment to the purchases? Well, we don't particularly know yet what's going on here. Essentially, we want to understand its effect overall on the population. Do we consider expanding the size of the sample? And the reason we wouldn't do that is because we hopefully, did our best to determine what the proper sample size would be ahead of time. And lastly, project the detected error to the entire population. This would be our answer. Final answer would be letter D. We want to understand the effect of this on the entire population. Well, with that being our last question, it has been my pleasure to walk you through these questions. Have a great rest of your day. Keep powering through, study hard, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.